So welcome back. First time we've been here for 2014, of course. So you will be pleased to know we are booked all the way through the year. We're every second month. Before we get started, I want to thank, first of all, the guys from United Suites. We've got to thank Wintec for the venue, great venue, screens, all that stuff, awesome. So thank you to those guys. Actually, good Wintec and so Caleb back there is our host really here, and also want to thank my fellow organisers Kim and Kim. It's been an interesting few months in social media actually, I think, since we last met up. There's a whole bunch of things happening. There's two disparate models, if you like, that are happening with payments. So you've got Facebook on the one hand saying, build a big group of people and then we'll charge you to talk to them. And you've got YouTube on the other hand saying, build a big group of people and we'll pay you for doing that. So pretty sure I know which model is going to work in the future, but it's interesting to see that that's one of the things that are happening. The other thing that I find really interesting is everything's mobile now. Most people are doing their social media on mobile, which a year ago we were saying that was happening, but now it really is. I think it's really there. So I think that's quite interesting. Another thing that's happening quite a lot is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is huge. So I was down in the weekend actually, Trotfest, which is the movie sort of world for New Zealand. A lot of directors and producers and stuff like that. And everybody's talking about crowdfunding. How can we get our films made, crowdfunding. And you might ask what that's got to do with social media. Well, the crowdfunding platforms need people driving the people to them from their groups. So what I think we'll see a lot of in future, very soon, will be crowdfunding managers who will be social media managers, basically, but just with the whole idea of crowdfunding. Because the few people that I talk to, producers and directors, that have tried this, it's just too much work for them to do themselves. So if you haven't looked at crowdfunding, go to Kickstarter, have a look, see what it's all about. But it seems to be the thing that's happening a lot. And you know it's the current thing when half the stories on the news about what's up and coming, they've taken the clips straight out of Kickstarter. So, okay, and finally, the people that we've got coming up. So, mark in your diary, please. 30th of April is our next event here for the Social Media Club, and we are going to have the Secret Santa Twitter story. Twitter Secret Santa story. Okay, right. So Sam, who some of you no doubt know, who started it off, but we're also going to have the guys from New Zealand Post that have taken it over. So we're going to see the build-up of it and where it's going to go in the future. So that'll be on April 30th. On 25th of June, we're going to have James Hancock here, and he's going to be talking about portraits for charity that he's been doing and how he's used social media to make that happen. So that'll be quite cool. We're looking also to have Simon come and talk to us. I've got Simon's last name at the moment. And he does social media for China, for exporters. So it's really quite a different thing. I haven't nailed him down to a time yet, so fingers crossed we'll get that. So I'm working on that. And I would like to see if we can get somebody on crowdfunding this year. But so if anybody knows of anybody who's good with the whole crowdfunding thing.
I know someone. It's not me.
Yeah, we don't want you coming back.
You're supposed to say that after I insult your city.
Okay, so yeah, no, let me know afterwards because I'm quite keen to get somebody on that. Okay, so that's us for now. So who I have now to speak to you. I'm not going to even try and read out all his accolades because frankly I don't care. But he is far more onto the social media than I. So Troy is currently the social media manager, or actually
that'll do.
Social media manager for Telecom New Zealand. He was the social media editor for the New Zealand Herald, and he still does some work for New Zealand Herald on video games and so forth. So I would like to put your hands together. Welcome.
First of all, thank you to a lot more than the 3 people I was expecting to turn up. This means I'll actually have to make a show of it. Now, this is probably the 4th time I think I've actually stood up and discussed anything to do with social. Normally I was used to kind of being in the social kind of dungeon, being not really dungeon at all, it was New Zealand Herald newsroom, and not really externalising what it is I actually do. So there may be 500 ums, 600 ahs, and a couple of while I get into rhythm. So I guess to begin with, because I realise that I'm in a school of media arts, and I look around and I see people that are eventually going to be far better journalists and editors than I ever was. And with that, I'm going to kind of segue a little bit into how I actually came to be the Herald social media editor. Unlike some of you in this room, and some of you in this room eventually, I never actually graduated from tertiary education because I took some terrible advice from one of my tutors who said, I can't believe you're not working already. Me being 21 and stupid went, oh, that sounds excellent. I'll just go out there and try to find some work. And as it happened, I didn't. So I was working in the health system for a good 8 years. I started really young, I think I was 17. Before I actually got into APN and the Herald Online as an online content editor. But from there, things kind of began to work out because by that point, I'd already been working in social media community management on various levels and scales for the better part of a decade, since the time I was about 15. So things kind of converged really neatly where I was in the place where news happened, it was where I always wanted to work, and I had this kind of skill sitting in the back of my head that wouldn't become useful for another 3 years, but when it did, things accelerated very quickly. So just to quickly roll through, I was on the night desk at the Herald for 3 years, just taking copy for the morning's newspaper and dumping it into the Herald CMS. But along the way, I picked up all the processes, happened to be at the same kind of desk of pods as the likes of Tim Murphy and all the top Herald editors, learned everything on the job. After 3 years, they were like, oh, do you fancy being an online editor? Yes, I do. After 6 months, something happened. And this is where the Herald first picked up the need for and the value of a social media editor. Who remembers the picture of Willie Apiata stepping out of a place in the Middle East, albeit looking awesome? Yeah, a significant part of the Herald readership did not quite find that so awesome. The Herald had social media profiles at that time, but they weren't really they were broadcast channels. Well, the broadcasts all came this way. And it was about that, there were the kind of criticisms that bled into the letters to the editor pages, and it bled over into talkback. How can you expose our men when they're in danger? How can you do this stuff? And what was the Herald's answer? Well, there kind of wasn't one, because they were utterly bamboozled by this relatively new form of feedback and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. And so Jeremy Rees, who is the editor of the Herald Online and a mad scientist of news, kind of went, and I'm like, yeah, hello, what's up? You know that social media stuff, don't you? Yes, I know that social media stuff. Where are we going with this? He explained the Willie situation and said, we basically need to throw someone in front of the hordes when things like this happen. I went, okay, well, it's either that or a bus, so I guess I'll take the hordes. They can be reasoned with, right? So that became one of the first kind of parallel, one of the first main struts of what this particular social media editor did. The other one was to actually use the daily news dialogue as an actual dialogue and do some debate. But what that actually looked like didn't become clear for a couple of months. So I took up the job in June 2010, and that meant I walked right into the FIFA World Cup, which was great. Super, ultra, mega engaging, everyone was having a great time. I didn't really learn a heck of a lot. And then Christchurch happened. And then Pike River happened. And then Christchurch happened again. And it was those 3 crisis events that very quickly and uncomfortably, but necessarily, altered the way that New Zealand did digital news, and altered the way that New Zealand did digital news in partnership with its own public. It changed everything. It also meant a lot of us didn't sleep very much. Right. I don't even remember what slide it is. Let's assume it's relevant. Okay, actually it does. So one of the first things that kind of happened was, now that news organisations and the public were all kind of occupying the same sandpit, all posting to the same networks.
There's a hand dryer in the toilets.
Well, first of all, let's be incredibly grateful that they are in fact washing hands. Thank you for keeping us germ-free. Really germ-free. So to be entirely fair, I probably take about as long when I'm drying my hands. None of you guys are a 29 centimetre span. I can palm basketballs. No one put out a basketball and call me out on that. Okay, so what these events did is it really forced the way that and I'm going to use media here as literary, as established outlets, when really it can mean anything from a floppy disk to you. It really did change the way, the dynamic between the media and the public, because all of a sudden, we're all using the same networks. We'd come down from the ivory towers a little bit, and what it kind of meant was a redefinition of what a mainstream media outlet's kind of responsibilities were. And in this particular space, because what happened a little bit in the first Christchurch quake, definitely during Pike River, and to utterly frustrating amounts during February 22, was that everybody jumped on the power of the word breaking and the power of an official hashtag that everybody used. And all of a sudden, what could have been really great kind of crowdsourced channels and free flow of information became this ridiculous kind of white noise. And so one of the first kind of responsibilities of the mainstream outlets was to stamp credibility on the information that was worth listening to, and to utterly sort out and ignore, and to demonstrate what useless information should be ignored. And the public kind of took up, utterly naturally, because thankfully we have a really good cooperative public by and large, took up the responsibility of doing the same thing back and amongst kind of their own friends. But since, I think the underlying principle still remains, but since there's kind of been and you see it around award seasons, when bloggers who aren't affiliated with publications that are part of the newspapers, Publishers Association, wonder why they're not up for Canon Media Awards. There becomes this kind of grinding gears situation of whose content and whose viewpoint and whose status and all these things are more legitimate. And going down that road, I don't really see good things happening, when what I think is what actually should happen and where the future should actually go is to take advantage of a codependent relationship that I've already seen happening. Now, the way that this happens badly is when a member of the public is on the ground, something's happened, tweet a picture of it, and a news website steals it without attribution. Pardon me for speaking French, but as a social editor watching other section edits take that, I fucking hated it. Absolutely. And not just because when the public complained about it, I was a social media editor on the front line hearing it, but because it damaged relationships. You know, you could have asked for attribution, and then all of a sudden you've got an advocate out there who can offer you stuff exclusively later on, who may want to talk to you more, because it's not just about stealing a picture, it's about asking for it. And since you were there, what else can you say? What can you add to this? And that was a principle that was overlooked far too quickly because of the race to get news out first. Does a few minutes really matter? Especially since, you know, give it 20, 30 minutes, your staff photographer is going to be there anyway. They're going to file their own pics, and that thing that was stolen, or borrowed, or whatever, it's going to disappear from the article page. Was the damage really worth it? And I think addressing that issue in newsrooms and building that relationship with news content creators out there who are basically reporters, just of a different kind of, cut from a different cloth, solving that problem, I think, does two things, two flip sides of the same coin. It's a way that mainstream outlets remain relevant as time goes on and everyone becomes a content creator. And it's a way that citizen journalists and members of the public who contribute to this actually feel valued for what they do. I cannot for the life of me see why the relationship can't work for everyone. And I really wish that I had a sexier name for this, but I don't. I even went on TV and said the same thing. I called it the three-legged construct because it was like, I came up with Marmageddon, but I can't think of a name for this other than tripod. But the way I think for now, and eventually newsrooms will possibly absorb one of those legs, the way I see it working for now is you have your established news desk doing things more or less the way they know how, the way they used to, but will evolve over time. You have your public over here as an audience, as deliverers of insight, and helping to tell the news conversation by demonstrating what's important by the minute, by the hour, by the day. And then in the middle, you have kind of the social news desk, actually working for both sides. Here's the story that our newsroom is trying to tell in a way that is relevant and engaging and informative for the public. Here's the story coming back in from the public in terms of the information that they want the professionals to find and their own creations and views upon it. That does mean a lot of this for the social editor / news desk, but having done it, it's exhausting, but it's also kind of fun and rewarding. So that's the way I see the future of relationships between the public and news organisations going forward. And the first time that penny dropped for me was 2012, which was actually a long time after in news years, definitely in digital news years, was a long time after beginning to do this, that the penny really began to drop in terms of this relationship and co-creation. And it was the Olympic Games that taught me. What happened was the Herald, Weekend Herald, Herald on Sunday, was sending a team of 7 or 8 journalists, I forget, it was a rather large contingent of journalists and photographers to the Olympic Games. And one of the team fell ill. And they're like, okay, who do we replace him with? And it came to me because of the social work that I did in Christchurch, which I'll get to later on, but I don't know, this is how I figured out the segue would work better. Because what I had done in Christchurch was basically go down and blog from the areas that had little coverage, zeroed in on the stuff that had little attention, but was actually driven by what people in the area were actually saying. So an experiment happened. Let's chuck him on a plane, off he goes to London, do what you will. I got there not really having an idea of what it was I was going to do, other than the fact that the paper had asked for a column. Now, I'm not typically that opinionated. I usually keep everything to myself because I can't be bothered defending my viewpoint. So Shane Curry, now editor of the Herald, said, look, can you do a column for us just on colourful stuff around London, all the stuff away from the sport? I'm like, so I'm not going to do any of the sport stuff? No. You're going to do stuff around the games. Okay, cool. How frequently? Weekly, every couple of days? Daily. So apart from a couple of days when one of the publications didn't actually need the content, I ended up writing a column a day for nearly 4 weeks, which was kind of absolute murder. But that was the only part of what I did that actually had any structure. And it wasn't until I was kind of studying, they give you these huge ID cards when you go through for the Olympics. They're so big and they all look the same no matter what you're actually doing there. So I got asked quite a few times if I was an athlete. Very flattering. Sorry. Extremely flattering. Although halo was not an Olympic sport. Although, funny story, I actually am in the London 2012 video game. It's ridiculous. I'm not even kidding. I was a hashtag in Scotland for people who maxed Troy Randy Forbes. It was ridiculous. Anyhow, so it wasn't until I was kind of studying in my jet lag-induced haze what my accreditation actually meant. Because I thought it meant loser who gets to do everything and actually go into stadiums. Wrong. It meant I could go extremely deeply. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see an Olympic sport. And there are special chartered buses, they take roads that no other cars get on. You go around the Olympic Park, and the first thing I did was went to swimming heats where I think New Zealand's Lauren Boyle, who'd just gotten some, she was really getting some major momentum, so I'll go see her. I think Michael Phelps was in heats. And as I was on that bus, this gigantic penny fell from the sky and clocked me in the head. And after I got over the minor concussion, I realised what I'm here to do. Everybody in that stadium had a smartphone. Everybody's watching on TV, everybody's commenting. No one's going as deep as I am with the skills that I have. And it wasn't until then that I kind of discovered what my responsibility was as an accredited news professional. Get in, go as deep as I can go, find all the stuff that's obvious, find all the stuff that's not, all the stuff that I would want to see and that I think other people would want to see and be included in if they were there themselves. So from there on, I became tweeting, blogging, Instagramming, YouTubing, not so much Facebooking because I hate Facebook and also it was really clunky with the purpose, but I socialed the crap out of the Olympics from there on in. I still refer to them as the easiest 20-hour days I ever worked. And I'm not even joking. I was up at 7 a.m. Actually, no, I'll finish my day at 7 a.m. I'd be out the door at 9 a.m., out to first events, bam, 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 tweet. Find somewhere to eat if I could, if I didn't die along the way because it was very hot and I was always dehydrated. The events and travel would usually see me out till about 2 a.m. I had a Herald column to file at 7 a.m. By then I was too shot to write, so I would get into my little bed. I can tell you the accommodations, by the way, way better than Sochi. Those fools up there are suckers. Laptop. Although I didn't have a fridge in my room, so you know I'm very hard done by. Laptop would go on the floor. Within reaching distance, I would collapse into bed, pass out. Alarm would go off about 6:45. My arm would kind of reach out like this. It would reach around for the MacBook, and it was a big ass 17-inch aluminium MacBook Pro. So it's not the kind of thing you want to be doing bicep curls with in the morning, but I did. Pull it up, going, if Val can, I can. And I would just start plunking, not knowing actually what I was writing until whatever was principle in my mind that had actually survived all of the previous day's activity would actually come to pass. And so it was that I still managed to fit in my brief about writing about the colour and stuff around the games, but I also added that responsibility of just getting in deep and sharing back everything. And that put me in some places that I'm really glad that I paid attention to where the public was sending me. That was the other part of it. And there was a journalist in England a couple of months prior who did exactly the same thing when the riots were happening. He just basically rolled out his phone and said, right, where do I go next? And the public told him. I was able to do more or less the same thing with the Olympic schedule, which was really handy when you had when you had like two major Kiwi events of interest happening at the same time. I was like, which one do I go to? I've got no idea. I'll listen to the public. Where would they want me to go? And that's what I did. And horses. I don't really care too much for horses or the horsey said, I'm sorry, I know I am where I am right now, and some people really love horses, but it's just not my thing. But it was pretty clear. Get out to the equestrian. Mark Todd the daylights out of this thing. And so I tweeted the events, paid really close attention to what was happening kind of to the left of this on Twitter, which was Mark Todd had become the new Chuck Norris. Or he'd actually become the new Willie Appiah, that he'd kind of been appropriated in terms of Chuck Norris. And if you're not familiar with this, I'll get to the end of the story in a second. If you're not familiar with the whole Chuck Norris meme online, he's capable of the most incredible superhuman feats, like switching the light switch off and being in bed asleep before it's gone dark. Things like that. Willie Appiah and I think Piti Weepu after the Rugby World Cup both adopted that mantle. Well, at the Olympics, it was Mark Todd. And again, access. He had a Twitter account, but he didn't really use it. And it wasn't really used by him anyway, so he didn't really have a hope of seeing this stuff. But access. After he and the team got their bronzes, kind of shot up to him, introduced myself, went, holy crap, there's this guy that I've been watching since primary school, and explained to him, I said, look, do you know who Chuck Norris is? No. So, that was a culture shock for me. If everyone can know who Michael Jackson is, surely everyone can know who Chuck Norris is. No. And so it was that I had to explain to Mark Todd, first of all, who Chuck Norris was, why I was introducing him to this conversation and what people back home were saying about him, which wasn't really a thing before then. I mean, you get sports fans conversing with athletes on Twitter and stuff, but there's an element of stage management to that, and athletes only banter amongst themselves. They don't often get it just dumped on their lap while they're trying to have a pint at the Greenwich Tavern after winning their medals. So I explained to him what this whole Chuck Norris thing was about, and he ended up pissing himself. Not because of the drinking, because it was funny. And then one of the other examples that I'll cite, and this one will actually bother me for the rest of my life. Valerie Adams is scary huge. Has anyone actually been in her presence? She's terrifying, isn't she? Lovely, but terrifying. And that's when she's in a good or neutral mood. Try speaking to her just after she got that silver. Now, I did point out I'd spent several years in the health system. By this point, I'd done Christchurch. I've done death, I've done mourning, I've done misery, I've done every condition. And a lot of times, by the way, I spent working in psych wards. So I've seen a lot of the human condition. There's a whole extra level to it when it's pure, unrelenting grief from someone who could tear your head off without a second thought. And I did pretty much the same thing. Val had completed her round of interviews with, the established ones, Crowd Goes Wild, Sky Sport, not TV3 and TVNZ, they couldn't get in, which again put more responsibility on me to share stuff out, because a lot of our mainstream media couldn't actually get into the stadium. They had to broadcast from parking lots. So eventually I kind of, and it is as you think it is, a lot of media, a lot of elbows. It's okay, 100 kilograms, 6'1", I can look after myself. Boom, boom, in there. Then politely line up, and eventually, by this point, I'd struck up a really good relationship with the New Zealand Olympic Committee's media manager. I said, Ashley, can I? She went, yeah, and she led Val over. And it was, again, she's massive, she's sobbing uncontrollably, and this poor, short, little blonde media manager's rubbing her on the arm and saying it's okay. And I looked up, and on one hand, I've got my smartphone writing notes. I've got really good at doing it with one thumb. If you can, do it. And just saying, I just said to her, and I'm looking up at an invisible Val now saying, I think, I can see that you're extremely upset. Here's what they were saying at home while they were watching you go through that, while they were watching you compete. And I just read her some of the commentary right off the page, in sequence, as it happened. I feel really bad for making her weep more, but she was then able to back to these people, right back to them through my thumb, working overtime, give a statement directly to them. It didn't go to an editing room. It didn't go under a sub-editor's eye. It didn't go to a cutting suite. It just went from her through the web back to everyone at home who was just saying these things. It was a very direct, personal way to literally be a medium and link people to the story that they were just watching unfold. And in a nutshell, I think that's about as good of an example, and it's a sporting one, I know, it's about as good an example as I can think of how this three-pronged relationship could work from here on out. There will be, certain strains and conditions that affect the way that the story is told, but yeah, in a nutshell, I think that's how it is. I think that's the way that both sides of the story and the story itself maintain relevance. Now, I touched a little bit before on the abuse of official hashtags. Fact is, crises like these in the digital age that we had, completely unknown to us. I promised I'd slow clap, but she's gone already. Never mind. So a lot of this, for media, for New Zealanders, certainly for those involved in it, and again, straw poll, was anyone in Christchurch when any of these events happened? Anyone affected by any of these? Anyone? Distant, not distant? Just work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't think of many people who didn't have a direct connection in a way. I knew people who, their home suffered damage, but they lived away from the zones. But it affected people they knew, so they would, it didn't change anything in terms of me worrying for people I knew, but there are other people with closer kind of Kevin Bacon degrees of separation here. But one thing that happened very quickly, too quickly for my liking, was the flow of information that should not have been given credence. It was far easier, I think. It was fun. I think to a degree, the first one, the September 4, 2010 quake, was better executed by the public because there was less of this kind of rush to be seen, to be doing the right thing, and be being quick, and to be breaking and all this stuff by to be honest, people who really had no business doing so. Even the media were trying to figure out how to do this stuff. So how could untrained people? And that's not a knock on the general populace. It's just a fact. Journalists and editors and even enthusiasts, for want of a better word, who really pay attention to the art of taking responsibility for a story and for facts, even they were getting it wrong. And even they were stumbling over themselves. But it really came to a head first in Pike River because everyone was really quick to latch on to a ZB report that a body was being seen taken down the mine when actually that hadn't happened. And it really came to a head on February 22 when abuse of the tag happened really quickly. By this point, though, I think those right-minded people in the community had learned to kind of turn on those who were abusing it and kind of how to cut it out. To me, when a crisis happens, certainly the way I saw it unfold from the newsroom and the way that I saw it unfold amongst people who were either affected or wanted to help, was it boiled down to certain things. How can I help? It's easy if that's your profession to go down and to restore infrastructure, restore telecommunications, sift through bodies for rubble. Not so much for people who wanted to be a part of it and to get that information out. So part of the news organisation's responsibility, the way that I saw it, was to zero in on what mattered, and that meant telling people where power was out. And that was literally, studying, what's Orion saying now? What's the situation with water? Where Portaloos been? And that became a real sticking point for a long time, where Portaloos were in Christchurch. It was about zeroing in on the things that people needed to know, and only the things that people needed to know. Where cell coverage was, where missing people were. Welfare checks was a really, really big thing, particularly as when that quake hit, and I think people who work within the telecommunications industry here tonight know that all of a sudden a lot of the city went dark. So it meant that people who were still online and could curate and disseminate that information had an extra added responsibility. And it was the responsibility of news organisations to kind of set the tone for that. Here's what's valuable, here's what you need to know. By all the power in the world, please ignore the other stuff. And I think it's something that by and large New Zealand is better at now. But there's still a race to be seen as authoritative when you shouldn't be. So there are unique responsibilities for the different players in this. And I've touched on them a wee bit. The skills that you'll find in the newsroom are about identifying what's useful information and putting a stamp of credibility on it and making sure that it goes as far and as wide as is necessary. Jump to the third one, recording the history. Because eventually, 50, 75, 100 years from now, New Zealand will look back on this and what record will we have? Possibly front pages of newspapers as it is now. Who knows? Politics, don't have a clue. But that's one of kind of the known but unspoken responsibilities of news media is to actually work as a reporter of history. And that's why people always share front pages of newspapers. Here's the one from the day I was born. They will keep special editions because those are the snapshots in time that are easily but not so readily captured by digital means. And particularly when it's something on a news homepage that will change after half an hour. You can go back and scramble and try to find the page version and hope that you have it. So there's the recording of history. The other one is connecting the dots. And And that was really important in Christchurch terms of shifting, expanding the dialogue from what happened to be, like if you got to the 6 p.m. news, you learned about the death toll in the CBD, the state of certain buildings, how the PGC building was, how the cathedral was, and the other one that escapes me right now because I'm severely dehydrated. And other than that, it was, what's John Key up to? Those are kind of the things that hit the 6 p.m. news. What me and a couple of others who were studying kind of the social dialogue realised that obviously you had 50,000 households out east that weren't being heard of. They were very, very silent. And it was one of our guys, Cliff Taylor, who first figured that out. So he went down there and got on his bicycle, because you couldn't take the roads, got on his bicycle and rode around and just kind of recorded back what he saw. But because that entire part of the city was offline, it meant that those stories weren't really getting through. So the dots started to come together for a few of us at the same time. I noticed it because those who could get back into cell range would point out things, I haven't heard from my friend in Bexley. What's going on? Or I went out east and it's a mess out there. Just scraps of anecdote. And then Campbell Light began to pick up on it as well. So there was this momentum. And that's one of the responsibilities that I think the public call attention to by saying how it is on the ground level. I think it's the responsibility of media outlets to pick up on that and go, right, what's happening here? Although one citizen actually did begin to take that responsibility for himself. He was a man named Peter Hyde, his name was, and with he and his wife Vicky lived up in Redcliffe, which was very cliffy, lots of boulders falling, and he'd written a blog entry about, I think it was the 3 Christchurch. There was Shower City, where people could take showers, there was Quake City, where it was all damaged, and then there was like Limbo City, which is where which was basically out east. It was where a lot of people simply had uncertainty, they didn't know what was going to happen to their homes, they were alive, but they were completely screwed. But how to report this stuff when you've only got so many people in the newsroom and they're all interested in stuff that I mentioned previously, death toll, buildings, John Key. Social media experiment time. So about a week after that quake, I was down there, and again, there wasn't really a brief. There wasn't really even a platform. Like the day, the decision was made at 4 p.m. on, say, a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a plane at 9 a.m. the next morning. Got no platform, no way to host it on the site. So I very quickly cobbled together a Tumblr blog and began to post to that. But by and large, it was just straight to Twitter, pulled in through Storify, and a lot of this was kind of pulled together on the fly, which is where we drop down the social news desk. We've done the value info in both directions, we've studied the trends. Then you had to strategize on the fly to figure out how you tell the story with what you've got. Because from Auckland, even though you could see this stuff happening, you didn't really have an appreciation for the difficulties of actually being in Christchurch until you got there. I got a rental car. I felt really bad about getting it back 8 days later because the suspension, let's not speak of it, and it was just a dirty mess because guess what? The roads, potholes, everywhere. I think I crashed into a fence once accidentally. I was a digital journalist. Everything I did went to the web. Great. That meant I spent a lot of time walking around streets going like this, trying to catch a signal and hoping that the drain wouldn't be enough to kill my battery. Managed to get there, thankfully, which was really good, because what was the information that was going out? It wasn't death toll. It wasn't the state of landmark buildings. It was, in Bexley, they need this. I dropped into welfare centres and said, hi, I'm from the Herald. They would have a little freak out because they didn't know the Herald was watching. By this point, they'd been in this for a week and had no idea the rest of the country was watching them. They had no idea. So it was, hi, I'm from the Herald. I'm going from welfare centre to welfare centre because you guys are still here, but it's very evident out there that you don't have what you need. What is it you need? That's all the question really was. And so I learned those things and then just turn it back, put it to social, put it to the Herald. And that was actually really useful because, again, people outside of Christchurch wanted to know what they could do to help. Well, area by area, district by district, the needs were different. Not everyone actually needed food. There was one community where they were sweet for food, but a lot of kids, they needed nappies. They needed things like solar lights, batteries. These were needs that were not articulated 5 kilometres up the road, where it was give us all the food that you have, give us SIM cards, or we've been promised truckloads of goods from elsewhere in the country, but there actually are no trucks to deliver. Can you help us arrange a courier service? And that actually became the story. And one other thing that came out of that was absolutely staggering. I mentioned before that this entire part of Christchurch was offline. People would grab my smartphone and go, hey, can I check Facebook for a second? In the back of my head I'm going, well, I have no battery and I got a little signal, but how can I say no to you? And so it was that for the first time since February 22, people were able to say to their friends and family across town and across New Zealand, I'm actually alive and I'm okay. And that's not something that every journalist is necessarily going to encounter, but it took on an extra dimension. It actually became community help on a different level. That was just a thing to do. I probably had more conversations that went unpublished than ones that did. These people just needed to get that stuff out. And that's kind of by the side. So yeah, that's the media's responsibility, basically. Find what's useful, make sure everyone knows it's useful. And we can now quickly and rapidly in the same, I say we, I'm not even in the news media anymore. It happens now in platforms and in languages that everyone understands. One thing that I did learn while doing the Christchurch thing is that the stuff that I went down with was not enough. And I think that's kind of true for anyone who's doing social reporting in the field. Christchurch was really, really rammed home because it's not like I could get to a PowerPoint quickly or get a top up quickly, things like that. But it's become as journalists are now becoming more increasingly expected, especially those who work for websites, are expected to turn out more content than just stories. I kind of identified, here are things that will help you do your job better, if you happen to need them, if your newsroom demands it. I think the absolute minimum, smartphone, because in a pinch, it will do everything that you need it to do. Yeah, I'm thinking of pizza, it will order that too. Spare battery, if your phone takes it. External battery case, if it can. I'm still, and again, disclosure, I work for a telco, but I'm not saying, hey, buy our stuff. I'm saying, as journalists, here's the book and pen that you need in the 21st century. I mean, I'm still utterly tethered to my battery case now because I'm completely paranoid about running out of battery because I Instagram too much. Those are the baselines. Get familiar with apps that will make it really easy for you. Brad is somewhere in the room. Now you pulled out a dictation app when you were speaking to me previously. What was it?
It came with the phone.
Okay, so your phone is awesome. As an Apple user, I really fell in love with Speakeasy. It did make things easy for speaking, and the scrubbing thing is really good if you have to transcribe stuff. Now, I don't know if you're as particular about transcription as I am. I get every word. Yeah, I hate sleep. Sleep is stupid. If you're capable of getting a bit more next level, and definitely if you're working overseas and you work for an organisation, or will work for an organisation that counts pennies and pinches them so tight that they scream, portable Wi-Fi hotspot and local data pack will save your bottom. At a guess, if I had roamed with what I did for the Olympics, it would have set ABN back. And this is out by only a couple of $1,000s. It would have set them back about $40,000. What I did at the Olympics. Instead, it cost just over £100. That was for the hotspot and a couple of weeks worth of SIMs that I use and throw away. It meant that I was on network where I needed to be. There was no routing with this. It was just on time, on budget, and done. Which, when getting things to the web quickly is of the essence, you don't want to be left hanging, especially when editors who have no idea of the concept of having to push stuff to the web in trying conditions is on your back saying, where is this stuff? Because they will still operate to an old world standard. Cool little thing I kind of picked up and used once before I actually left the Herald. They make them for iPhones, and I'm sure they do for others. This little multi-directional mic thing, you slot your phone into it like that, you hold it like an ice cream. It's got 2 mics. Fantastic for running interviews. Because if you're using a late model iPhone, all of a sudden you've got video that's actually good enough to run on a website. Your video producer will love you. Your union head will probably kill you because you're not supposed to do this stuff, but the lines get that blurry within digital. If you're getting next level, if you have or can get access to the digital XLR, get a mounted mic, get a dead cat. I know that sounds terrible, but it's actually a fuzzy thing that goes over the microphone that cuts out the wind. All of a sudden you've got better HD quality video. And it just boosts your versatility tenfold, because then you're able to take really good HD pics as well. And a monopod. Purists may say tripod. I prefer the monopod because it's just easy to use. There's none of this hulk stuff. It's just shaft out, plant, snap, or record, and then you just whack it back up and go on its way. And laptop, of course, as your home base. For Christchurch, I had that. That is absolutely all I had, and came out wishing I had more. For the Olympics, I used everything here except the multi-directional mic. Part of it was because you can thrash your battery pack as hard as you can, it's still going to run out. But I still had a laptop to kind of tweak off and stuff if I needed to. It meant that I was able to bang out pretty good quality pics for the website if they needed it, even for print if they needed it, and I think they did use a couple as well. That I'm sure all of this will lead to some really interesting ethical discussions in the newsroom about who's supposed to do what and workload and all that stuff, but the lines just kind of fell apart in terms of digital anyway, and I would argue very strongly for being as versatile as you can and upskilling yourself as early as you can, because you have absolutely no idea where those skills are going to take you. Again, I never actually graduated. I've got, I think, four communications degrees to my name. I've got 4 unfinished ones, and an education one as well. My attention span, not so great, but also life got in the way. But the skill set was there, and the attention to news, and I guess the duty of care that a journalist has to support its community, support their community. I think that's actually what it really boils down to. It's to me it's a service job. It's the best service job there is. Or second best, because I really like my new service job as well. I'm just lucky that wherever I go, I get to serve. And that, I think, for those who are journalists in the room, and for those who will be, it is an absolute rush when it's in the right, when the conditions are right, when things are happening, when they're going at speed. It can also be an absolute pain in the neck. For anyone who's in digital news, for anyone who's doing social news, I don't envy you this year because it's election year. And New Zealanders online are already getting ridiculously feral. I feel for anyone who has to do that for a job. I guess my nutshell is over. This is the part where I chuck in a Transformers gag because that's what I do. And anyone who has questions now hits me with them.
Did you get any backlash from photographers or videographers when you were taking the pictures?
No. I was really lucky in that the 2 photographers that we took 2 photographers. We didn't take any specialist videographers, but every single Herald photographer was also they were empowered to do video, because the video producer was like, just whatever I can get is great. The photographers didn't mind because I wasn't going with the same grade of equipment that they had. I wasn't going to the same places that they were. I didn't have their accreditation. Yes, I could go to the mixed zones. No, I could not go down to the field of play. I'd been using Instagram for about a year by that point. One of them, Brett Phibbs, had been using it for a few months. The other, Mark Mitchell, we were trying to convince to use it. And we actually bonded over social photography. We were showing each other trips, stuff that Brett knew that I didn't, stuff that I knew that Brett didn't. So I think because there were boundaries in place, I wasn't in their business, they weren't in mine. I wasn't really threatening what they do in the same way, and I would suggest, I have a link to it here, but if you're chasing on Instagram and you go back or you look at hashtag NZ Herald Live in London, you'll see that the photography I did is markedly different to what actually goes into a news picture, because mine was a candid tour. That was the brief that I set myself in social. It wasn't about, brilliant, gorgeous, beautiful sports stuff that would put a 25-year professional out of their job. It was just about getting people to the games. So the content was different, the boundaries were different, and we had a really good kind of working understanding together. Actually, the three of us probably were the closest on tour. We had those professional and respect boundaries that we didn't tread on each other's toes at all. And by the time it was over, actually, it was those two were like, how do we get more of our stuff online? That was the one thing that really came out of it that didn't really happen before, was they saw the potential for getting their work seen. Because they bang off, 200 to 300 frames per event. If you're lucky, one goes into the paper. And that's a lot of incredible, brilliant, gorgeous content that just goes absolutely to hell. Yeah.
So in a way, you've pioneered a lot of this between social and the media, I guess. So now you're out of it. Is it continuing along those lines? Is the social and media starting to really form that partnership, or is it going to be dependent on the next crisis that pushes it again?
I think the next crisis will accelerate it, because there will be people who approach it from a point of view of, well, I want this as my opportunity to do something new. But I think it's an evolution that will happen over time. A lot of stuff that I saw happening in the media before I left it is now beginning to come to pass. So I feel like it's tracking along almost as it should. The major organisations in New Zealand, by and large, they've got really good grips of their audiences and what they need to do. No one's perfect, but I feel like the evolution and the cooperation is happening neatly enough. I see the Herald a lot more asking before taking, whereas it was often beforehand it was like, how did that end up on the website and why did no one ask me if I could specifically chase that one? Oh God. No, there's maturity now that there wasn't there before. There's respect for the public that wasn't there before. And it's basically that spirit of cooperation that is the most important thing for all of this to continue, and it appears to be happening. So I'm pretty chuffed with that.
Well, sounds like you got to do some cool adventures with the Herald and that. You got to do all that international travel and stuff like that. Like, what drew you away from the Herald?
When I say I got back from the Olympics and figured out where news was going, at pretty much the same time, it was like, I've learned that, and now I think the business and the newsroom needs to kind of live into it. But what do I do? And it was the first time in my life that I actually went, I'm still in my new job, I'm still learning as I go along, but there was something of a kind of a penny that dropped in me in terms of looking back with everything that had happened in those 3 years prior. And that was a massive period of kind of growth and learning on the fly. And I looked back and I went, right, I think there's kind of a watershed moment here where it's like, how much more can I learn? And there were two reasons for this. One was personal. How much more can I learn to advance in the newsroom so that I can support my wife? But also, how much more can I learn? Because by that point, I developed a real appetite for learning stuff, which I hadn't had since J1. I was a terrible student. All of a sudden, I was learning stuff and I loved it. And there came a point where it was like, how much more can I learn? And then I looked around the newsroom, and Tim Murphy, editor-in-chief of Herald Title, was one of my biggest inspirations there, because he was a police and gallery reporter at the Herald through most of the 80s into the early 90s. How did he transform into a leader? He left. He saw the world, worked in PR actually, I think for Singapore Airlines. He went off and learned the things he needed to do to improve himself, to stay interested in his life. And for the first time in my life, I kind of realized, well, I need to do the same thing. There are massive aspects of being a social media professional that I don't understand. At that point, marketing, don't have a clue. I used to hate our marketing department. I used to hate them with every fibre of my being because they were trying to sell Facebook real estate from underneath me. And I'm going, no, it's an editorial channel. You take your stupid Heineken ad and you get away. So there was that. I needed to understand how that worked. I needed to apply myself in terms of learning everything that could happen around social, not just the stuff that I developed on the fly. And to do that, I needed to go somewhere else. And telecom was a really good fit for me because all of the stuff that I did, all of the things that I do and enjoy doing to this point, gaming online, talking crap online, you know that one.
Yeah.
So much of what I did was rooted in technology that the opportunity came up and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can involve myself in the stuff that is actually giving me my livelihood and also learn the stuff that I'm not going to learn anywhere else. So the timing was just, the timing was really good. But also it was like, hang on, okay, so they are a very big, ultra iconic New Zealand brand, but they're also a community leader. And they also have some kind of responsibility, and I view the same with Vodafone and of 2 degrees, and of anyone who provides New Zealanders with the opportunity to do this stuff. I think there's a role in serving the community and being a community leader, and that made it a really easy decision for me to kind of go, because it meant that I could continue that duty of care that when I really boil down to it, one of only 2 things I know how to do is try to look after people and talk an immense amount of crap. And that has in some ways already kind of borne fruit. In November, we were probably the most high-profile advertiser to pull out of Radio Live after the Roastbusters thing. A lot of that decision was made, not all of it, I'm not saying hey, but a lot of that was based on what will it mean to New Zealand if we take a stand on this? Because it's not something that corporates do all the time, but what does it mean to us? What are the risks? And it was just one of those moments of time, and I think you get the same answer from any of those that did ANZ, Countdown, Yellow. It was like, no, this is a thing that has really struck hard at the core of who we are as a nation, what we believe and what we want to grow into. So what do we do about it? And my role in that was to, first of all, signal, because I saw it happening days before it became a thing. Again, it's one of the benefits of observing channels and observing social as much as you can. You begin to learn to pick up things before they become a thing. And I was kind of like, God, this is going to become a thing. So from there on, my role in that was to take insight every day. What's happening in the news around it? Because we were identified as an advertiser very early on. And I know that other advertisers were working the same way. And it's like, so from here on out, it was like, right, study the story, gauge our community's feelings, gauge our own feelings internally. And then when it comes time to make a decision, I can only go, right, here's my point of view based on their point of view. So that for me was how the duty of care thing kind of transferred over. And I guess in a way, ultimately it will in terms of how we do stuff day by day. We're not as resourced as I'd like, but we're getting there. And my key principle is this. Don't be dicks. Be helpful. Be someone you want to be involved with, which is difficult when it's, those who work in the bank, I know, the head of social for a couple of banks as well. And it's like, how do you be friends with your bank? You can do, but it's not the biggest major out there. And it's the same with us. We give you things that let you do awesome stuff. So the guys over at Vodafone, they do a great job. 2 degrees, they do an amazing job. It's just about, if you have a position of community leadership and trust, no matter what your sector, no matter what you do, I think you live up to it. You do the best that you can to live up to it. The same is true for journalists.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Shoot.
Did you deal with, for lack of a better term, idiots commenting on stories online?
Trolls and that.
Stuff commented, you know?
If my desk had a black box, and if that's the case, then privacy issue. Also, I never want another to hear it. Again, I was speaking to Brad about this beforehand. I would always give myself the right to read, digest, have a massive internal swear fest, or even, and this is something that if you have an issue with shooting off at the mouth, open up the notepad window, write what you would want to say to it, actually get it out, feel it, and then look at it and go, would I actually put my name to that? And 9 times out of 10, you wouldn't. So I think there's a purging element to it, but because being a nationwide news brand, you tend to attract quite a lot. So over time, I think you would become, I would describe it as first of all having multiple kind of bullseyes all over you, and then developing multiple thick skins. Eventually, it was only the worst of the worst of the worst that would actually get me to that state. And if it was comments attached to a news article, I'd just be really glad that wasn't my area. We had a comments editor to that, it was his problem. And he was the angriest, surliest English dude there ever was. He was just miserable. It's like, haha, enjoy your life. But of course, if it went on Facebook or was in response to something that we dropped on Twitter, that became my problem. And then it came down to, right, I can feel about this however I want, but I actually have to park that aside because I am the voice of the Herald, and it's kind of an authoritative deal. I can't let emotion rule what I do in either channel. I have to let reason and conversation guide what I do. So there's a lot of giving myself permission to feel this stuff, because you will. If you're behind a brand, no matter what it is, but more so, I think because news is about the flow of information and dialogue, I think it hurts that much more. It's about giving yourself the permission to realise you are who you are and you represent who you represent, and that means you can look at the trolls under the bridge, but you don't necessarily have to feed them. And so I came up with a kind of, I always had 3 basic tiers of feedback in terms of what was being said to us. There was the must answer, the stuff that deserved an answer, that deserved recognition. There was the stuff to listen to, but there might be some insight value, but not necessarily having to go back to it, because that may open you up to a very long, lengthy dialogue you have time to do, or it may encourage a troll or whatever. Like you can develop an instinct for where a conversation may go. And there's the stuff that just absolutely deserves no oxygen whatsoever. Yeah, it would be 100%.
Just keep a prepaid phone and you can create some fake profiles in there. Use people on it all the time.
Unfortunately, I actually have thought about doing that, and I will actually cop to being one of the few social media professionals who has a quote-unquote bad account that is utterly untraceable. None of you will ever find it. You won't get me. But even then, I actually really am very careful with what I say. But I think the problem with that would be, I would worry that if I could pick up my own kind of dialogue patterns, eventually some super genius would as well and go, ha ha, that's you. And then I'd be like, yeah, how'd you know? So I'm probably about an 8 out of 10 in terms of guarding what I say, because of who I represent, and also because I don't have the time to back up my opinions. I got onto Twitter because I was too lazy to blog. Why would I want to waste all day defending an opinion?
Just on that.
Yeah.
Journalists' personal accounts. I know it's something that I've kind of noticed is a lot of the public seem to be gravitating towards speaking directly with the journalist as opposed to going to. Sorry, I work for Waikato Times.
I know.
So, okay, that's weird. As opposed to going to our Waikato Times account. How much responsibility is on the journalist to keep it clean and that sort of like how much trouble can I get in?
I feel.
And then I can say Troy told me. So.
Do not use my name in any of your disciplinary meetings, or do and see what happens. I think to a degree, I think there's a baseline of responsibility for everyone in terms of treating the public with a degree of respect, something that John Drennan fails terribly at, but he can almost get away with it because he's half commentator. And that, actually, I'm just going to rant for a second. I hate people who can't figure out the difference between journalism and commentary. Absolutely hate it. Anyway, I think there's a baseline of behaviour that any journalist who can be linked back to their organisation and therefore has a degree of job security on the line should be using to protect themselves, but I don't know if it's far away above what I would expect the average person to do. I think to a degree it comes down to what a journalist's specific beat is. I think an entertainment writer or a lifestyle writer has slightly more leeway to toe that line than a police, court, political, someone in the gallery does, which is funny because by and large the gallery are the worst behaved of the lot. But when you see the clowns they have to report on, you can kind of understand why. So I kind of feel that's how it is. It's almost tied to the desk that you occupy, but again, don't be a dick. Just don't be a dick. And I know there's someone in the room who has had this experience. There's a real joy that some people take in using what they see as social misbehaviour to try to cost people their jobs. And because people try very hard to one-up journalists by virtue of the fact that we're all content creators, I think journalists are particularly vulnerable to that. Because there's the element of, I can do your job better than you, why aren't you doing what I want you to do? Why you're not using the trust that I give you the way that I want to. There's all this stuff that puts journalists at a particular degree of danger. So I would caution that there's a certain amount of watching your own back that you need to do, but it wouldn't be too much more than I think I would expect of anyone who's trying to protect themselves. Which is probably a lesson for a police reporter from a certain news organisation who's getting very flirty with a lot of his female followers. That could go badly.
All right. Thanks, Troy. Very rarely do we get crap spoken so eloquently. So that was really good.
That's all I can do.
There's a few more drinks there. Hang around. You can ask Troy some more questions before he has to take off back to Auckland. And I'd be happy to talk to some more people and meet some new people. So stay around for a bit, but that's us for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tristan.